First of all, it was like cast on, break the yarn. I was like, wait, why would I do that? I don't know if any of this makes sense, so I'll stop myself now. I had a coupon at the thrift store.
I'm Nora, and this is also known as Nora Knits.
Hello there, I'm Nora, and you're watching, also known as Nora Knits. Thank you so much for coming to hang out with me for another episode today. Let's start out by getting the elephants out of the room. First of all, the cold sore has progressed. She's still with us. Second of all, I was in the mood to do something different with my hair today, and this is what I look like now. So there was no going back once I did it. So we're giving, like a little 70s, 80s diva moment, and we're gonna have to just run with that and embrace it. So with those things out of the way, I think we should just go ahead and dive on in. The good news is, as you can see, I am here wearing my Cyclamen sweater by Cecilia Garcia Rodrigo that I had finished up by the time of last week's podcast. However, it was still blocking, and I'm trying to wrap my head around considering projects whips until they are truly off the blocking mats, because I think otherwise they will perhaps tend to dwindle and wait for their blocking day. So she is officially blocked dry. I've worn her once and I love it. So from beginning to end, this project took a total of 32 days. Not bad at all, especially considering the fact that it is an oversized sweater for a bigger person. And I love it. This was done in the Karen Blossom Cakes yarn in the colorway Cabana. And I'm not going to go into too much detail. If you want to know more about it, then you can definitely just go check out last week's podcast episode where I talked about it a bit more. But I wanted to let you know that it's done. It's great. I'm loving the fit of it. And I have yet to hear back from the designer about those couple of errors. So I will still continue to just keep you posted when I do hear back. So that's that on the Cyclamen. Get that out of the way. And now we can move into some more exciting works in progress. The first whip that I have to show you today is my Folklore Cardigan by Lion Brand Yarn. It is their free pattern, and we have made some progress, baby. So I actually, off camera, after I stopped filming last week, I realized that I had not put in a progress keeper. So I went ahead and added one. That's one of our little Black Pearl Magic teddy bears right here. And so yes, clearly a ton of progress has been made on this. I am knitting this out of the Lion Brand Wool Ease yarn in the colorway Fisherman, and it is a wool acrylic blend. So far, I've actually really enjoyed working with the yarn. This is a gift for my cousin that I am knitting for my aunt, her grandma. So the yarn came in a kit and it was gifted to me from my aunt to knit for my cousin. And I'm loving it so far. So I am essentially knitting this in the size small with minor modifications. I reduced the moss sections. So it's moss, cables, center cable, cables, moss. And I reduced each of these moss stitch sections by 2 stitches each. So a total of 4 stitches less than the small pattern is. I have also chose to reduce the size needle that I am using as compared to what's called for in the pattern. So I'm knitting this up on US 6 4mm needles. So the recommended gauge in the pattern is 16 stitches per 4 inches, and I'm getting 18 stitches per 4 inches, which was my goal so that I could hopefully reduce the size of this to fit my petite cousin. And I have been following the measurements of one of her favorite sweatshirts. So I have adjusted all of the lengths of everything to sort of accommodate that, in addition to the modification I made of bypassing the ribbing in the initial cast on and using a provisional cast on to just dive straight into the cables. As this is knit up in pieces, a back panel, the 2 front panels, and then the sleeves, I figured the easiest way to get a nice seamless looking ribbing was just going to be to knit each of those 3 panels that make up the body of the sweater and then go back and knit the ribbing in the round. I did mention last week that I have been following a spreadsheet that I made for myself. I don't think I was very clear. The pattern has charts that are actually there at the bottom of the pattern. So I didn't even realize that those were there yet. But I had seen that on Ravelry, there are other people who have knit this pattern and they have made one big chart from all of the individual charts, because the charts are individual for each one of these cables that you see. And then you, the knitter, are expected to jump from chart to chart. I just was not in the mood for knitting charts when I picked this project up, even though I actually do really enjoy a chart. It just wasn't doing it for me that day. So I decided to just make a spreadsheet out of the written instructions. I have since then put a photo of that on my Ravelry project page so that if you are knitting up this pattern, you could feel free to utilize that spreadsheet as well. The only issue is that Ravelry tends to sort of like dumb down the quality of images that go up there. And being that it is a big spreadsheet and you have to zoom in, the quality's not perfect. So if you are planning to knit the Folklore Cardigan Lion brand and would be interested in utilizing the spreadsheets that I have made and then will make for the front panels, if you're following me on Instagram at akanoraknits, if you could just send me a DM on there if you would like to be emailed a copy of the PDF, that would be the easiest way for me to do that. So I think I'm going to put up a general call on Instagram today, Saturday, February 24th, that this video is going live. I will put up on my Instagram stories a question box that you can let me know if you would like to receive the copies of the spreadsheets, and I will just email that all out in one mass email to anyone who wants it. So that's going to just be like a 24-hour window that I'll be interested in doing that for. So just so you know, if you don't have Instagram and it would be easier, just shoot me an email with the subject title saying Folklore Cardigan, and I will happily send you the spreadsheets that I have and then as I make them. So anyway, once I got to the end of sort of the body here, there's shaping included in the pattern for the armholes. And I wasn't sure how my modifications of reducing the stitches was going to affect the shaping, but it actually worked out pretty nicely that you are intended for the smallest size. I believe that on either side of this body, you are to cast off 4 stitches. And so all I did was cast off 2 stitches on either side. And so because of the 4 stitches that I already had done less, it brought me back to the pattern numbers for the size small, medium. I hope that that makes sense. So essentially from the body cast on to the bottom of the underarm, I have been knitting this according to my own numbers. And now that I'm in the arm shaping, I have been able to follow the pattern for the size small, medium. So that's been so much easier. This is, I feel like, going by pretty quickly considering the fact that it's all cabled. It's a beautiful pattern. I'm not a Swiftie personally, but the girl that I'm knitting this for definitely is. So I think she's going to know exactly what it is. But I also think that if you just want a cable knit cardigan, it's a really pretty texture that you get with the diamonds. And then like, I consider these my sort of like unicorn cables. They look like little unicorn horns to me. But so far so good with this. I have to, from this point, so there is a schematic included in the pattern, which has been fantastic for me to reference in order to shift these things to accommodate my cousin's sizing. And so the body I knit to about 11 inches. Then from the underarm to the shoulder is going to be about 8 inches. And at the top of the shoulder, there is some shaping in there for that shoulder line. So I think that I am going to continue just following the cable knit pattern, as the pattern says, for the next 7.5 inches or so. And then we'll just tack on, I think it was like 6 rows or so of short row I don't know if it's short row of shaping, it says. So my overall goal is to get somewhere around an 8-inch sort of underarm to shoulder line. And like I said, this is all based off of my cousin's favorite sweater. So I feel pretty confident that things are going to work out in that way. So let's go ahead and measure from the progress that we've made so I can move my progress keeper on this. So it looks like I've done just over 11 inches of knitting on this back panel since we spoke last. And I said this last time, but it's never going to stop amazing me just how quickly you can knit something up when it is in this size. Even holding this sort of up against my own body, this is basically, pretty much exactly half of what I would have to knit for myself to be the back panel on a garment. So it is kind of a treat to knit something up like this in a small size. But I think I'm just really into the cables right now. It's turned more mindless the more I've done the 24 row repeat that makes up the diamonds, to the point where I like to still cross off row by row. But in my spreadsheet that I've made, each row that involves the cables are done in blue. So I could just go through and cross off one row by another and then bust out the cable needle when I see the blue and I know exactly what's supposed to be happening on those rows now. So it's just been nice to keep it. It's interesting that following the pattern is keeping it mindless. So by having the pattern with me, I feel assured that even if I get halfway through and kind of forget where I am, it is right there. But I'm mostly just using it to make sure that I go row by row and don't miss anything. And it's really just for the center cable at this point. Let's go ahead and move the progress keeper. I also have only pretty recently tapped into my second ball. You should still be able to see the ends on the back here. So at this point, we've barely used, each ball is 85 grams. So I would say we've probably used about 100 grams at this point, if that's the case. I have each cable sort of section marked out with the more identifiable markers at that center cable so that I just remember to pay attention there. And that has been so incredibly helpful. So I would say that if you've never knit cables before, or if they intimidate you, know that these little tips and tricks can definitely make it more mindless and a lot easier to get through when you have to do less thinking and remembering. And honestly, to not use them is just silly. Right now, like I said, I'm still just focusing on getting through this underarm up to the point where it's ready for shoulder shaping. So the goal is to get from here up to be about 7.5 inches. And at the moment, we're at just over 5. So I'm pretty confident that by the next time we chat, this whole back panel will be done, at which point I will start the front panels. And I haven't yet decided if I'm going to do it 2 at a time so that I have both sets of front panels on the needles at once, or just go ahead and do one and then the other. I think it's going to be a game time decision. However, if you have any thoughts on it, I would love to know. If you've done front panels 2 at a time, is there anything that I should be aware of before I go into it? Because I've never done that before. So please let me know your advice. But otherwise, that is the Folklore Cardigan, again, by Lion Brand yarn. I think, is it by Lion Brand? By Lion Brand. And at the moment, this has been on the needles for 8 days. Okay, so now I do have something new for you. If you caught last week's podcast episode, you will know that I was able to get my hands on the Nora yarn in the colorway Sake, which is my dream yarn to knit with. So I'm so excited to be playing around with it. After we spoke last week, I was able to knit up a swatch, and oh my goodness, is this divine. I knit this swatch on 5mm needles, and I went ahead and fully soak blocked it. I decided not to pin it out this time because I did have people letting me know when I had done my swatch for my dad's sweater that when you're blocking, a lot of people suggested to sort of let the yarn do its thing. So I did not pin this other than to just prevent the edges from curling. So I was not stretching it. That's what I mean to say. I was not stretching it. I just sort of laid it flat and then just pinned the corners so that they weren't curling up while it was drying. And it left me with this beautiful swatch. It's very drapey and it's a little bit holey, a little bit gappy. This yarn says that the suggested needle size is 4.5 to 5mm needles. So like I said, this was done on the 5mm needle, and the gauge that I got here was about 16 stitches per 4 inches. So between that gauge and the fact that the fabric is still just a little bit looser than I would want it to be, I decided to drop down my needle size to a 4.5mm needle so that I could start knitting up my sand cardigan by Ulin Knitwear. Now, this is not going to look like anything to you right now, but I have cast on. And what you are looking at, let me flip it over, is actually the back panel of this cardigan. I wish that I had more photos to show you of this cardigan finished. So trust me when I tell you when mine is done, we will be taking some full-length photos, because this cardigan is very much like a duster, sort of long line cardigan. I want this as a really sort of chic layering piece that I could just toss on chilly mornings. And so that was why I chose the sand cardigan. I also liked that it had pockets, and I liked the fact that there are no buttons, as well as the fact that there's no ribbing. I think gave it this very sort of cool and contemporary vibe while still being such a classic. I also just thought that that would make sure that this yarn was really the star of the show. So I have now been working on this project for 2 days. Like I said, I am using 4.5mm needles. That's a US 7 when the pattern calls for 5mm needles. But I just felt like with the fabric I was getting and the fact that I was a little bit off gauge, I would be better suited to just drop down, get a little bit of a denser fabric, as this is going to be a long sweater. It's going to have some weight to it. So I just want to make sure that I'm not giving it too much opportunity to overstretch. So I cast this on. It was actually like pretty comical. So, it was just a relaxing afternoon. I said, I want to cast on today. My swatch was dry. I felt confident enough not re-swatching, but rather just anticipating the changes in gauge by dropping down the needle size. And then I was in between 2 sizes anyway. I have chose to knit this pattern in the size 5. And cast on, so excited, literally went to read the next instruction, confused. Read it like 3 times, couldn't figure out what was going on, eventually made an educated decision, and I think it was the right choice. But at that point, I decided that for the first time, I'm so sorry that I'm terrible with using Ravelry. I wind up taking notes for my projects in all sorts of different places. I have some that I will just physically write on the pattern, some that I will throw into a note in my phone. If I don't have my phone, I will have my boyfriend text me the note that I want him to tell me. I have some notes on my iPad. I'm horrible. So I decided for this pattern, because I was like so just confused right off the bat, I would just make my notes in real time on Ravelry. Let me know if that works for you. It means that my thoughts are not going to be as concise and sorted through, but my idea is that I will go in, you could see the date when I had that thought, that note, put it in there, and then at the very end of the project, I will try then to just go back and sort of summarize my feelings on everything. So let me know if that works better for you. And also, I think it would be interesting to know when you go to someone's Ravelry page for a project, I think I would like to make a sort of template for myself to ask questions of, what did you think about the pattern or the yarn? Or I don't know what it is that other people look for on other people's Ravelry pages. So if there's particular questions that you feel like we should be asking ourselves in a finished project page on Ravelry, maybe you could let me know in the comments and I will try to make a template to then apply and slowly but surely update all of my Ravelry information. There's just been like a fuzz on my nose this entire time. Will we get it? Oh, I think I got it. Okay. Cast on, next instruction. Confused. First of all, it was like cast on, break the yarn. I was like, wait, why would I do that? But what I determined was that we were then starting short row shaping for the back of the neck, which is bizarre to me. I guess when I've done top down, I've done short row shaping on raglan styles, but I can't say that I've done short row shaping that I could think of on even a drop shoulder or something, because usually the drop shoulder that I've done has just been constructed with that sort of trapezoid shape, as in casting on a smaller amount and then doing increases down the shoulder line. So this was new and I was just confused right away. Then the way that she instructs to do the short rows in this pattern are not German short rows, which are my preferred method, only having ever tried wrap and turn and German short rows. Wrap and turn, I always get a hole. I didn't love the way that the short row, the shaping was done. And then what essentially wound up happening was the instruction was knit to X amount of stitches past your last yarn over, turn, and then, knit back or whatever it was. But then there's an instruction in the pattern for what it means when it says turn. And I think I got mixed up because in the instruction for turn, it accounted for knitting the last wrapped stitch basically together with the stitch next to it. But that stitch next to it was also accounted for in the knit X amount of stitches past the last wrap. I hope that makes sense. Inevitably, what I wound up doing was reaching the end of stitches to even increase and do these short rows within. I reached that point one row sooner than I was supposed to. I recognized that in that second to last row and just sort of cheated and didn't go as many stitches past the wrap. But I have one less row of short rows. I figure it's not going to change things too much and it's my own fault. But I do feel like that instruction of saying knit X amount of stitches and then turn, and then the instruction for turn, when both of the knit past X amount and the instructions for turn, each of those accounted for the same stitch. There was one stitch that sort of in the Venn diagram of those two instructions overlapped. And so I didn't know if it was supposed to be allocated to one instruction or the other, or if it was the actual, I don't know if any of this makes sense. So I'll stop myself now. If you buy this pattern and you're interested in knitting this sweater, I think I did a better job of explaining it actually in my Ravelry page. So that was just, it's never a good feeling when you literally just start a project and automatically it was like, wait, I don't get this. Hang on, is this what I was supposed to do? So that was a little bit frustrating, but I went and I read there's only 3 or 4 other project pages that pop up for this pattern when you go onto Ravelry, and no one else. There was one other person who had said that they felt as though the pattern could have done with like a schematic just for a visual of what's happening. And I would agree with that, but no one else seemed to have the issue that I did. So it could be a me thing. I did go watch Kalila's project vlog when she had test knit the sand cardigan for Ullin Knitwear. And she also didn't mention anything about the complexity of starting. So I don't know if it was one of those situations where maybe in the test group that was just sort of sorted out really quick and then, you know, pushed off is like, oh no, that's nothing, easy enough, got it. And then once it actually gets out to someone who's isolated knitting this by themselves, it's like, no, that didn't actually make a ton of sense. Or if it genuinely is just me and I don't know what I'm doing. So that's the only thing so far. At this point, I am smooth sailing, just knitting back and forth until the next instruction. So I wanted to show you, I'm always looking for clever new ways to use the tools that I have already. And so I have my light bulb stitch markers dangling off of here. They are not a row counter. They are not doing anything like that for me today. What they are doing for me today is I have been instructed from the shoulder seam to knit X amount of inches, and I didn't want to just keep referring, and I'll measure this thing so many times before I'm even close to that measurement. So I went and just laid out stitch markers in a Linka Monkey chain until I was at the sort of closest I could get while still being under that measurement of X amount of inches I'm supposed to knit. So now I know while I'm knitting that I could just keep referring to my little Linka Monkey chain here, and only when I get to the bottom of this chain do I actually need to pull out the tape measure to measure how far I've come. So I thought it was clever there. But yeah, what you're looking at here is the top of the sort of back shoulder. I will say one thing, this yarn has been incredibly inspiring to work with so far. The colors are thrilling to knit through. Every time I see a new one, I'm like, oh, that's my new favorite. That's my new favorite. I need a sweater in that color. I need a sweater in that color. And that part of this has been really, really, really fun. I have gone through a few parts that are so skinny. That's the nature of this yarn. It's the whole imperfections are what make it so perfect. And it really has been the case where there are some very chunky sort of unspun bits and then some that are so super fine, and they're sort of just filling in the gaps for each other whenever they show up that way. I have so far encountered 2 knots in this one skein, which I felt forewarned about by other people having used this. When I've approached the knots, I have cut them out and then just spliced the yarn back together, and it's easy peasy, no problem. So I know that somewhere someone had justified the knots in the yarn. I'm not going to complain about it. I have found it easy enough to just splice that together. So no big deal here. And yes, that was the thing I was going to say, is that I don't know why, but this yarn just wants to curl up so badly, which has made this sort of like long just noodle. And the fact that it's pretty lightweight, it's been a little cumbersome to knit on, which is funny because then juxtaposing it against Emma's Folklore cardigan, that is so skinny and yet so long. And then this is just so long and yet so short. And so it's been just tricky trying to move all the fabric out of the way and trying not to let it bunch up. I also have yet to get a few more of the Mindful cords for my Knitter's Pride needles. The Mindful cords are the ones that swivel. I am using those on the Folklore Cardigan, which makes just the back and forth of it all even that much easier. This one, I get it around and these cords are oh gosh. And these cords are oh gosh. See, it's dangerous. Anyway, I just think that is so funny, but we really haven't done much here. I guess I do need a progress keeper because I went through a period where we weren't using progress keepers because essentially it was like by the time I came back, that thing was done, or it was just the end of a sleeve. There was no real documentation that could be done as far as how much length was being knit from episode to episode. So this will definitely be one that we can look and see how much progress is being made each week. And I just enjoy that. I think it's fascinating to see where my head is kind of at. This week, I've just been so immersed in those cables, and this has just been a little luxury thing here and there, and who knows what next week will entail. So let's pop a stitch marker on this. And such a gorgeous yarn calls for a gorgeous progress keeper. So I have one that was gifted to me from Colora from While They Play Designs, and see, it's rolling up so much that I can't even find the cable in the yarn. So we will pop that on here. And if you're curious to know, in the past 2 days of having this on the needles, I have done just under 6 inches of knitting on it. So that's where we're at today. Not really much to look at, but we'll see where we're at next week. And that is the Sand Cardigan by Ulin Knitwear. All right, now last but not least here, I do have a little acquisition this week, and that is some yarn that I thrifted. I'm telling you, the thrift store yarn, it is so hit or miss. When is even the last time we had a thrifted yarn? And that's not because I wasn't looking. I have been in the thrift stores trying to find some thrifted yarn. Still, I always am, but this is the reality that sometimes it, when it rains, it pours, and then at other times it's just absolutely nothing. So I did have a good find this past week, and that is this Louisa Harding yarn, and it is the Grace Silk and Wool. There are 2 balls here. They are each 50 grams, and they are 50% merino and 50% silk. They're the softest thing I've ever touched. It's a single ply yarn. They're in this really beautiful sort of burnt orange rust color that I just think is one of my colors. So I love these, and I picked them up. They actually came in like a little plastic baggie, and the baggie itself was, I had a coupon at the thrift store. So I used my coupon and I purchased the 2 of these for a total of $1.25. I think it was 26 cents, but yes, $1.25 for some merino silk yarn. The super exciting thing is that I think that these are actually already accounted for in my next cast on. So hopefully by next week, I will have a little bit more of that to show you. But for now, I'm just really, really excited about, they're so soft. I'd rub them on my face, but I have makeup on. Great little thrift find, 100 grams of yarn of merino silk for $1.25. You cannot beat it. Which brings me to my final point that I just wanted to make today. First of all, I'm so excited that you guys are excited about the Nora yarn. I'm just really, really happy to play with it. When I had gone on my sort of birthday yarn tour last year, I spent my birthday going from yarn shop to yarn shop up the coast of Connecticut, and it was really my first time being in yarn shops. And so we were still really figuring out what all went into knitting and how much yarn costs and all these different aspect of it. But while we were there, I had pointed to some Nora yarn and I told my boyfriend, I said, that's the dream. That's the dream yarn. And the other day when I was working on this, he said, hey, what was that yarn that you said you really wanted to work with on your birthday last year? And I said, it was this one. And so I thought that was really cool that I've really come full circle in a year of knitting and enjoying knitting to be working with my dream yarn. It's really fun. But what I wanted to point out here was that I feel like this episode today is so indicative and such a great representation of who I am. I call myself a whatever works kind of girl. I feel this way about makeup, about hair products. You know, I have a $40 foundation that sits in my makeup bag right next to my $5 mascara, and that's what works. So today alone, we've now talked about yarn that comes in at about $25 a skein, being the Nora. We've talked about the Wool Ease yarn Lion brand. That's about, $6 a ball? Now we've talked about some thrifted yarn that I picked up for $1.25. I'm wearing a sweater that was made entirely for a little over 25 bucks. So I just think it's really cool and kind of inspiring that all of these yarns, all of these different price ranges can come together and make one beautiful project. And with all of the variables, the one thing that all of the projects have in common are my hands. And that's really exciting to me. I hope that watching these podcasts for myself, as well as, everyone else out there doing this, it's really fun to see people work with different materials and everyone still come out with a project that's just as beautiful. And at the end of the day, no one's gonna know how much you spent on your materials. So the price doesn't make it better. The content doesn't always make it better. But whatever it is, at the end of the day, as long as it's coming off of your own two hands, it's going to make something special. So I just thought that was a really interesting, inspiring, kind of cool point that I wanted to make in today's episode. Before I let you go, I thought that I would just let you know, if you haven't seen it already, this past Tuesday, I released a new pattern roundup video that covers all different knit sets so that you could do your sort of own interpretation on the head-to-toe knitwear trend that I am forecasting for fashion in the knit world this year. So if you haven't had a chance to check that out already, I highly recommend it. I think the most fun thing about putting up videos like that is when I see the first comments that roll in are always, I had no intention of knitting a set and this video changed my mind. So even if you don't plan to knit a set, you might want to watch the video because you might change your mind. But otherwise, if you enjoyed this video, I would so appreciate it if you would give this video a thumbs up. If you like knitting content in general, then please feel free to stick around. You could subscribe and ring the bell so that you're notified when videos just like this one go live. And all that being said, you guys, big ol' thanks for watching. I will catch you on the next one. All right, you guys.